Under Amendment 64, as we all know, cities and counties have the option. They opt in or opt out. And we've had 6 meetings of this committee. The state has done partially its work, not all of it, as we know. But I think it's time that we take a little straw poll and judge where we are on this issue. Please keep in mind, we're not voting on any bill. The bill starts at number 3 agenda if we opt in. This is simply the option of what we want to do. And I'd like to start. We're going to go around the room, give everybody a minute or so to say a few words. And Mary Beth, we'll start with you as president of the council. Should the city and county of Denver opt in or opt out on retail marijuana?
It's not always fun to go first. I do want to thank Barbara and Ron and Laura for coming today and to let them know that I enjoyed very much working with them on the regulatory working group and was very impressed with the business that they were about. 67% of the Denver citizens voted for this adult use marijuana, and 57% in my district, so a little bit lower than the rest of the city, but still a significant win. And I started a speaking tour with constituents, both personally, through emails, through neighborhood groups, and through town halls, and learned that they were very interested in decriminalizing marijuana. And they felt that the application of the law had been often arbitrary and that that arbitrariness needed to go away and that decriminalization would be the best way. Very importantly, they understood that the amendment said regulate it like alcohol, and they did understand that it would mean there would be retail marijuana outlets. They did understand that. So I am expecting to opt in, but because of what I have heard, but I also expect to listen to the other things that they told me, that we need to be prudent and cautious about the way in which we opt in. They have asked that perhaps new licenses might be delayed a bit so that we understand what it means, what other experiences other municipalities have, for us to make sure that we have all of our enforcement dollars available and our enforcement rules available. And they wanted to make sure, above all, that neighbors had some opportunity to have input on new licenses as they do for liquor licenses. So, as a straw poll, I would opt in, but want to pay attention to the rest of what my constituency said about prudence and caution.
And again, just before I get to you, Jeannie, this is just an opt-in or opt-out vote. If you don't like what we craft in terms of a final vote, if indeed we have one, you can always vote against it. This is simply to follow the dictates of Amendment 64. Jeannie Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back just a little bit because I think I need to set the stage here. In 1997 and 98, it was my last term in the legislature. And there was a resolution on the floor. We were anticipating medical marijuana. And I was the only Republican to vote against the resolution which would have condemned it. In the voting booth, I voted for medical marijuana. That libertarian part of me said I will not allow people medically to suffer if there's a way that you can relieve the suffering. I liked the way it was set up at the beginning and the way it was sold to the people. People would be able to grow their own, or they could call a friend to be a caregiver. It was not commercialized. And for about 7 years, it went on that way. And then, through some, I would say, incompetency at the state level in setting up their rules, the rules were challenged, and the whole ball game changed, and it became more commercialized. Now, At that point, we're here in the city council. And even though I am not pleased with the commercialization for medical marijuana, that language in that constitutional amendment said dispense, and so to have dispensary seemed to be the constitutional dictate of that particular approach, and I supported it. But from my perspective, the state has shown its utter lack of ability to regulate and enforce the regulations they promised. I've heard promises for 4 years sitting here. What I haven't seen is performance. And as a result, just as you had said, Mr. Chairman, seed to sale, which we were promised would be that tight regulation, is a fiction. It has not occurred yet. And the state needs to prove to me that they're up to the task of regulating before I am willing to say we go a step further. Now, that could come at a later time, but right now it's still all promises, no performance. My district narrowly supported this amendment. I believe the figures you passed out at the very beginning said 52% in my district. So people there seem to have had a difference in rationale. Some really did want to decriminalize possession. Others wanted retail sales. I am constantly reminded, as I look at the language of this amendment, that either way a person votes now on opting in or opting out is perfectly in alignment with that amendment because it gives local governments the right to opt in and opt out. I did my preliminary survey and I asked about the opting in or opting out straight out. 53% wanted to opt out, and that is over 1,800 responses so far. At this point, I do not feel that the regulations are going to be strong enough. I want to see proof that they will be, that there will be safety, that people can count on what they are being told. Hasn't happened so far, so I would vote to opt out at this time.
Okay. We're 1-1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A little pressure on you, Councilmember Rob.
Oh,
Break the tie,
the
man.
pressure will build. And I want to thank my colleagues for their thoughtful comments already. And I agree with both sides. As Councilwoman Fotz said, the state amendment allows us to go either way on this. I represent a district that voted as strongly as any district in the city with District 7 and 8 to support Amendment 64. I do believe that the reasons for the support varied, but since I wasn't in the voting booth or at a cocktail party with each person who voted, I don't know their reasons. Some it was decriminalization, some it was retail, as Councilwoman Fotz indicated. I also think that my district is very split on the opting in and opting out. My district, I did not do a scientific poll as Councilwoman Fotz. I did a quick electronic poll that I closed very quickly so that it got primarily to the people who get my newsletter and live in District 10 and didn't go across the city. It didn't have time to do that. That was about evenly split on opting in and opting out. Informal polls at neighborhood meetings when I'm asked to speak are about evenly split, even in neighborhoods where the precincts voted in the high 70s for Amendment 64. It's very, very interesting what I see. But to get to your point, I do not believe that that at this point I'm ready to say opt out on retail establishments, but I'm going to be very interested in how we move forward, and I think an option between the step to move forward and opting out is a moratorium, which you implied in your comment, so that may come forward in some sense of legislation.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sussman.
Shepherd.
Shepherd, sorry.
Just to be
new.
clear, Councilwoman Shepherd, District 1, Northwest Denver. 66% of District 1 voters did vote for Amendment 64 to regulate marijuana like alcohol. This may just be semantics, but I'm not sure how honoring the will of the voters could be constituted as opting in. I'm just interested in honoring the will of the voters. 80211, which is my zip code, at one point had the highest number of medical marijuana dispensaries, as I understand, in Denver. And I think some of people's primary issues with those businesses at the time have largely been addressed. Number one was the sign waving issue, which we've already taken care of. Secondly, there were several that were located too close to the schools to honor our 1,000-foot limit. Those are now gone. Several of the businesses have weeded themselves out since they didn't know how to run a business, which has led to a reduction in the concentration of them within 80211. And I'm in constant contact with Commander Pazin from District 1, and a lot of the crime issues that people were anticipating as a result of these largely cash businesses being in the district haven't really, the statistics of increased crime on the level that people were concerned about have not really been borne out. So I feel we can figure this out. I know we're not going to, I'm not sure we're talking about the moratorium today, and I know we'll have a rich discussion on that, but, I feel pretty confident we can figure this out. So I'm not opting in. I am honoring the will of the voters. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am not, I just don't like those semantics. I mean, how do you opt in to honor the will of the voters?
Okay.
I hope that everyone understands what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. Councilmember Lopez.
3-1, if anyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been going back and forth on this issue, and I definitely appreciate the meetings you've held, the folks that have came to present to this committee, and just the different input that we've had. I have reservations on both sides. One, I feel that if we don't regulate it, the only thing we're going to be doing is feeding the black market, and that black market is not so friendly. It does not have a good history. It does not have a good taste in any of our mouths, and there are people who die because of that black market, and there are people who suffer because of that. So I think it would be it's not an easy decision. However, I did support medical marijuana. I do support regulating marijuana. However, I think it's very critical, and I rather have the discussion about what kind of draft we are going to see in front of us before we actually make this decision. And this is the reason why. If you drive up and down communities, in some neighborhoods you see an overproliferation of things like liquor stores, of payday lenders, of tobacco products, and they tend to target poorer, working-class communities of color disproportionately than anybody else, and that's not right. And I fear that if we don't regulate this is going to have the same effect on some of our most vulnerable neighborhoods. I do appreciate in the draft and looking at, and going ahead a little bit and looking at some of the draft ordinance, but 1,000 feet in terms of pedestrian access is just too short. 1,000 feet away from each other is not a buffer at all in many of our neighborhoods. And in neighborhoods where we lack grocery stores and other uses, we have an overabundance of liquor stores and other uses like this. So I'm not very comfortable with opting in or out yet until I know that we are going to have strong regulation. It's one thing to say are we going to regulate it or not? Are we going to opt in or out? I want to know what our opt-in looks like, Mr. Chair, before I make that decision, because at the end of the day, I do support regulation of recreational marijuana. I just want to make sure that we are regulating it right and protecting our neighborhoods, especially the most vulnerable citizens and neighborhoods in our city, before we actually move forward. So I'd be interested in, I actually have some proposed amendments because of it too.
Councilman Lopez, are you abstaining?
Well, in terms of opting in, I want to see the regulation first. I want to see what we can actually get to before we do it. Yeah.
So you want to opt in?
I want to opt in, but I want to see what.
Just don't put
really
words in
wanna
his
see
mouth, okay? Councilman Nevin? I think Paul Lopez can speak for himself.
Yeah. I do.
Okay. Councilwoman Lopez.
No.
What is wrong with me? Councilman Kadesh.
Ah.
Please. I'm
I have
sorry.
to read about that on the spot.
Okay. All right.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also specifically want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving the additional time before we did this. That was something that we requested, and you were very responsive to that. So I appreciated you slowing it down so we knew better what we were weighing into. I, too, won't make a final decision, obviously, until we see the language. But I did appreciate some of the testimony we had and the additional public comment that you had at the meetings from folks who said they didn't realize what they were voting for. And, you know, so I did go that extra mile, like many of you, and try to survey folks. I'm citywide, so I don't have the same kind of district concentration that you all have described so far. But I did, and I also don't ask yes/no questions because that's rarely the votes that we get to take. So I put the constituents to the best of my ability in the seat that we're in, and I asked them separate questions, which is, how do you feel about converting existing medical facilities to, you know, recreational retail? Overwhelming support for that. I had more than 500 respondents citywide. I separately asked then, how do you feel about allowing new establishments in? Lower support for that. Still over just about a third were undecided. So it did not, people wanted to know the details, just like some of us have said today, before they would say yes to additional facilities. But there was clearly a lot of comfort with conversion of existing among those who responded to my survey. And then I also asked some questions about taxation and regulation, which we're not at yet. But I appreciated that feedback. What it told me is that there are people who I think, whether they knew or not, are now weighing in a second time and saying, I'm comfortable with conversion. I'm comfortable with these facilities that have been in my neighborhood or, you know, and been in my district, you know, doing the same thing or a similar thing with different clients. So with that in mind, I'm supportive of pursuing the conversation to opt in, get to know the details better. I think that the length of time, and I think, too, one of the things, obviously, we all have heard from a lot of constituents, this use of the word moratorium, I think, is really confusing for our constituents, and I think we should probably make a pledge today. I'm going to talk about a transition period, which is what the state has created and what the mayor suggested. I consider that to be very different than a moratorium, and so I think that as we talk about it, we will probably give our constituents some comfort if we are more careful in which term, not that we all have to agree, but just so we're really explicative about which one we're talking about. So anyway, thank you.
Councilmember Montano.
Thank you. Like we had that roll on there too.
You've taught me well.
So what I want to say is that 68% of voters in District 9 voted yes overall for this amendment, and it's my understanding it was the highest percentage of yes votes in the city. Just generally, the lowest percentage was in downtown Denver and residential areas like Northern Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, and Chaffee Park. One of the numbers that was kind of astounding to me was the voters in Sun Valley. That was 82.66%. And I bring that up because it is the neighborhood that has the highest percentage of children over adults and the highest percentage of children living in poverty. So I didn't understand that. Well, I do have a wait and see attitude, so if that translates into abstaining, then that's what I would want to read on the record. But what I do want to say is that it just seems that most of the social costs of this amendment will be shouldered by youth in regard to brain development, a need for substance abuse treatment, and an increase of maybe youth starting drugs earlier. I would really like to be able to separate my hat as a council representative and my hat as a parent, but it's really difficult when you got a kid going into the 9th grade. So I can't completely neglect that, and my search is trying to balance out what all of that looks like. And I just want to say, according to the DPS Healthy Kids Survey in 2011, the 2012 school year, more students are now using marijuana than have smoked cigarettes. And so we know that the prevalence of marijuana is high in the lives of Denver youth already. There's an impact on brain development to adolescents whose brains are still developing, and quite frankly, sometimes I feel like mine is too. Studies have shown potential connections to loss in brain development in the areas of the brain that control memory and decision making. So just for the record, the feedback that we've gotten from neighborhood residents and schools is that they're worried about the closeness of the facilities to their neighborhood. Schools are concerned about proximity to their buildings and playgrounds, and neighborhoods are worried about how many are coming into their neighborhood and their responsibility to the neighborhood. So in closing, I just want to say that I reviewed again the mayor's letter when you invited him to come and talk, and the 3 key points that I would bring away that I completely agree with him, knowing that we haven't really drilled into the details of what we have in front of us. One was rigorous standards to protect neighborhoods. The other one was meaningful public hearing process. And the final one was no new retail marijuana stores allowed near schools. I added this, recreation centers and daycare centers. So I'm in the A column for right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's that? A?
Councilman Nevitt.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, echoing my colleague, Councilwoman Lopez. You've done a great job with this committee, and appreciate the hard work that goes into making this run smoothly. So, I think everybody's decision is contingent on the details that get worked out, but I'm opt-in. I think we need to opt in. I think we need to take this bull by the horns, and I think we need to lead. Denver is a leader. Denver is cutting edge. Denver is the first jurisdiction that embraced the business model of medical marijuana. We set the stage for the state when we established our regulations before anyone else had acted. And the state then followed suit and made regulations more or less that worked with us. We had to adjust ours some. But we have been, from the beginning of the emergence of this new industry, we have been in the driver's seat. And that is exactly where I think Denver ought to be, and that is where I like to be. Denver and Colorado are now, this is a wave. This is happening all over the country, and medical marijuana will continue to get approved in states across the country. Marijuana will continue to be legalized in states across the country. Colorado and Washington were just, I think, the first off the mark. And I want us to continue to be at the cutting edge, at the leading edge, telling people how to do it right. And we've done that so far, and I want to continue doing that. And so for me, opting out is really not an option. The devil is in the details, and we'll work through all those details together. But I want us to be in the driver's seat. I want us to be showing the state and the rest of the country how this is done right. Thank you.
Councilmember Lehman.
Thank you. My district is very similar to Councilwoman Potts's district in the numbers, but they still voted for the Amendment 64. You've heard great discussions on both sides, and I think what is key is a discussion. I think that we can say we want to opt out, but it won't leave our city. So I am opting in. And I agree with what lots of you have said, which is it is our opportunity to deal with it. And so I am opting in because we need to deal with it.
Councilman Brooks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my district, District 8, is probably one of the most eclectic, diverse districts in the city, and rich, poor, black, white, brown, purple. And we voted 67%, number 2 behind District 9. And so I think, you know, talking to my residents and constituents that I work for, it was pretty clear that we were opting in. But I had some, you know, I just want to list some concerns and hopes, which kind of sounds a little bit interesting. And I'm glad people have pointed out that the devil is in the details, and this is a straw poll. So I just want to underscore that again. 2 things. I think regulation and enforcement are critical. The two areas that I particularly am focused on, and Councilman Lopez touched on this again, but the over-proliferation in low-income, high-minority neighborhoods. I have so many of these MMJ shops in my neighborhoods and have talked to business owners and have seen the effects on the street level very, very clear. And I'm concerned about that, and I want to make sure that we have enforcement and regulation in that. We are on an upward trajectory with tourism and business in downtown. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is how do we keep that up? How do we protect that trajectory? I'm concerned about folks who come in town and stay in our hotels, and how are they, as they experience commercial retail of marijuana, how are they exhaling in so many words? And so I'm concerned about that. And so how do we deal with that within our hotels? 4,000 rooms in Denver. So that's concerning to me. So those are some of the concerns, and I hope and I trust we have a really sharp team here. I hope and trust that we can craft something that will protect both neighborhoods. My kids I have 3 under 5, so I'm concerned about that as well. And I've seen young people affected in the last 5 years. I've worked with young people for a long time, and so I'm concerned about that. But this committee can work to, I hope, figure out some issues. Here are the hopes, which Councilman Nevitt, I think, touched on a little bit. But there has never been. I'm for businesses. I think it's the American dream. I think any entrepreneur that has the will and the guts to get out there and take a risk, more power to you. And I encourage every business, but I see a lot of discouragement of this business. And this is an opportunity for the city to maybe if you don't agree, to figure out what's the win-win here, because we all voted for it. So how do we come around and see an industry, because a lot of people in this industry want it more regulated than some of the other folks in the room, which I really appreciate. And how do we come along this industry and make sure it's regulated and make sure that this new business thrives in this city? Councilman Nevitt touched on this, but this is an opportunity to lead the nation. And that kind of language gets me excited. And so I think it's a great opportunity. And last but not least, I think this is an opportunity for us to find sustainable funding for our housing crisis. And that's a whole nother issue. But I just want to put that out there, that I see this as an opportunity for us. We're always looking for money to fund some of the issues within our city, and this could be a great opportunity.
Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank you for indulging my request to have input from folks that helped us take a look at how do we ensure that in this process we're protecting children. And in my opinion, that is a responsibility that we have to ensure that that is at the forefront of what we do as we make any decision to move forward. Additionally, I think it's imperative that fees collected absolutely have to cover our costs. We can't be asking the general fund to keep adding more staff to excise and license that would be needed to ensure that we have the enforcement ability to stay on top, regardless of what the state does or does not do. We have a responsibility locally as well. And clearly, the devil is in the details, and I will want to see the details, but a couple of key things that have already been mentioned that I want to just reiterate. The saturation of neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods that already have many of these establishments, are the same neighborhoods that have liquor stores and other liquor outlets, and looking at how do we address that issue. I think we need to track the social costs. You know, how many emergency room visits are we going to have? Are we going to see through our Office of Drug Strategy, you know, more and more young people having access to marijuana? We know that what is on the streets today is 10 times stronger than it was when pot was around when I was growing up, you know, which is also part of the cognitive impact that we have had public input and testimony about. You know, I appreciate the will of the people in moving this forward and addressing the issue, particularly from the incarceration aspect, because we have seen so many people, you know, that have gone through our court system and our jails and are sitting in prisons because they were impacted by 3 strikes you're out. And I think this goes a long way in addressing that issue. I think we will see significant reductions in our prison costs, you know, because we won't be sending as many people to prison as a result of this having passed. I believe that with the right rulemaking that we can get there. But again, I want to be intimately involved and ensure that we're doing everything we can that ensures that children are at the forefront of what we do in making sure that we are protecting them. And part of that is also, you know, ensuring that our neighborhoods have input through the permitting process. And so with that, I'll stop there.
And you're
Oh, I just said that. I would,
opting.
yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, I'm last, and I will be the only one to go on record to say that I actually voted against Amendment 64. Not only did I vote against it, I campaigned against it. I gave money fighting it. I wrote about it in various publications. But guess what? 56% of the people in my district voted for it, and I believe in representative democracy. So here we are. And I did attend a press conference held by Visit Denver with the mayor on that issue as well. I am, to follow up what Councilmember Nevitz said, I am proud of the work that we did on medical marijuana, many of us, some of us at this table. And I like to point out what happened 2 Tuesdays ago in Los Angeles. Los Angeles has been a disaster. There have been 60 lawsuits already with their medical marijuana. Medical marijuana, not retail, medical. So May 21st, something like that on Tuesday, they voted for Proposition D in L.A. And they wanted to reduce the number of pot shops in the city from about 700 to 130. Believe it or not, they had 700. I visited that city as soon as we got medical marijuana to see how it was doing, wrote about it, and said it was a disaster. And it was. Now, they also had, that was a Proposition D, they also had a measure, what they call F, which would have allowed unlimited number of dispensaries. That failed overwhelmingly. So Los Angeles has still got a lot of problems. And when you start reducing, when you go from 700 to 130, you're going to probably see even more lawsuits. But so I'm glad what we did here in Denver. In fact, I'm proud of it. And so I believe, I will definitely opt in. but I will work very hard to craft a bill that, that has rigid regulatory and enforcement aspects to it. We have to assure the public that we're not going to have what happened at the state. And what we say, we will live up to. And indeed, not only are the eyes of the country on us and the state of Washington, I say the eyes of the world. So I told some friends recently that was interviewed Friday by a reporter from Australia doing a story on this very issue. And there were 187,000 people in the city who voted for what was called then recreational marijuana, 187,000. My question is very simple. How many of those 180,000 will use the product at a retail establishment in our city? 10%? 15%? Who knows? I don't know. Nobody knows. We're dealing with a lot of unknowns here, especially when it comes down to revenue projections. I have no idea what's going to happen. But opt-in, you want to read down the final what we have here? Anybody else want to make any more comments? Oh, gosh. We have a change of opinions here? Yes, Jeannie?
I just want to clarify one thing. When we talk about opt-in and opt-out, it's only the retail establishment portion of the amendment that we even have the option to opt in or opt out. As far as decriminalization, I believe as far as the hemp as a plant growing,
Right.
all of those things are not subject to opt in and opt out. And my vote is strictly the opt out of the retail establishments, which we are allowed to make under the amendment.
Okay. Jeannie, then Mary.
And I wanted to clarify for Councilwoman Kanish that when I use the word moratorium, I was not talking about a transition period. I think it's very clear. I do like Mayor Hancock's letter in the 2-year transition period if we go that way. I was just saying that a moratorium is another option based on seeing how the state gets enforcement in place, based on revenue projections, based on the time it takes us to come to a place where we really agree that we've satisfied all these things that we're looking at.
Okay. Paul, then Mary Beth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make sure I was clear, and I know I seemed a little unclear. I know that we're going to be voting on a bill. I want to start seeing us work on regulations, so if that means opt-in, absolutely. However, like I said before, I'm dead serious when I say this. Like I said before, I don't have to vote for that bill. If it's something that is not, and I appreciated you saying that, if it's something that is not strictly regulated in terms of the separation agreements, in terms of, where these shops are going to be, then, if it's not strictly regulated, I'm going to be a no vote. I'm pretty much a no vote until you can convince me otherwise. But if it's just a question of shall we pursue this road, then yes. If that's opting in, then yes.
Okay.
I don't want to not, because there are other substances on the street that we can't control that continue to be on the street, and that's still a danger. So
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to be clear as day with
Okay,
that.
great. Thanks for the clarification. Mary Beth.
I just wanted to clarify what Councilwoman Fott said. Actually, we need to opt in on retail stores, cultivation facilities, testing facilities.
Yeah,
It's true that we don't opt in on whether it's decriminalized or whether you can grow your own, but we do more than retail stores. We're opting in on cultivation facilities and testing facilities.
That spectrum that allows you to
Right.
sell.
Exactly.
Okay, any other comments? Unless we'll hear, yes, Judy.
I just want to be clear that I want to be clear that I do have a wait and see attitude, but having said that, I also have the same attitude that I want to be at the table and work really hard to do what we can to balance out this amendment and protection of our neighborhoods. So I'll remain abstaining with the commitment to work really hard on the other things that I also brought up when we talked.
Now, wait a minute.
I'm still in it.
Opt in or opt out? You say you're abstaining?
Yes.
Okay, you're abstaining.
Yeah.
Okay. Last comments, final? We're going to start work today on drafting. We were. Yes, Dave.
I just want to convey a message to the folks who are in the audience today that one of the things that I think is really important is the issue of public consumption, and particularly around issues like, and particularly once this body moves forward and adopts something, that isn't just a green light to do whatever people want to do wherever they want to do it. I mean, we've seen situations where people are getting on the 16th Street Mall, smoking their joints. And it's that kind of thing that I think we need to, through education and through the work we do with the folks in the industry who have played a major role in moving things forward, in giving us your input, that this is something that is critically important, especially when we have children around. So I just want to say that to those of you who are here and have given us your input throughout this process. Thank you.
Okay. You want to read the finals?
Sure. We have 10 to opt in, 1 to opt out, and 1 abstention and 1 absence.
Great. All right, before David coming up to the table, we'll start. We got 15 minutes. This is going to be a long, grueling process. And we've already seen mixed reaction on our subcommittee. And all I ask is just remember one thing: nobody's going to get everything they want. This is going to be a compromise, just like we did on medical marijuana, right? Right, Councilmember Nevitt?